All right, in this section, we're going to be talking about prefabs and packages. As a newbie or a seasoned Unity veteran, you will be working with prefabs and Unity packages, I should say, quite a bit. Now, what are prefabs and Unity packages? Let's talk about prefabs first. Prefabs are these things that show up in blue in your hierarchy when you're using them. They are objects that allow for reuse within a project. Now, if you caught early on, I duplicated a cube. I just pressed Control D and duplicated the cube. That's not a prefab. I just happened to duplicate an object in my hierarchy. If I want to use a zombie across every scene in my project to reuse it, copy and paste, to drag and drop a bunch of times, I want a prefab. Prefabs allow reuse across and within all of your scenes. To know that you're working with a prefab, which is the special type of object that all shares the same properties, it turns blue. So that it shows you what the prefabs are in your project. So you can see that my zombie is a prefab. The main character, the vamp kid, is a prefab. So I can use him easily across my various scenes. Prefabs get new options that show up inside the inspector. They get this little menu here that can select the prefab in your project, or you can revert to whatever your prefab settings are, or you can apply these settings to a prefab. And I'll talk about what those mean momentarily. Next, also in the bits of reusable components, so to say, are Unity packages. Unity packages allow reuse across your projects. Now again, prefabs allow reuse across your scenes within a single project. Well, if you want to take some content from your particular project and save it or give it to somebody else, or you want to make a reusable package from it, you can easily export it as a Unity package file. And that's simply just a matter of right-clicking. I'll walk you through this process. And a Unity package can contain prefabs. It really can contain anything in your project. When you download something from the Unity Asset Store, if you go and you buy some zombie, for example, and you bring it down, the Asset Store is actually sending down a Unity package. Think of it as like a zip file that contains content for your Unity game. And it stores it on the system as a .unity package file. And you can find that location on your disk. And you can just double-click on it, and it will launch it into Unity and show you all the settings and import them. Now, there's dialogues that help us work with this that we'll walk through as well. But think of a Unity package as really just a zip file with a bunch of Unity-specific content. Now, there's also what's called the standard assets. The standard assets are provided with Unity. They are available out of the box upon your installation of Unity. You can also download them separately in the Asset Store to keep them updated out of band with Unity. They give you drop-in controls for a first-person character to run around your screen, third person. They give you a little car with some AI, aircraft, a rollerball. They're pretty neat. They also give you 2D examples, particle examples like smoke and fire. Also different camera rigs, so for following your characters around, for example. And I'll show you one of those in a second here. Also cross-platform input and some basic AI examples. So for example, if you want a little selectors, joysticks to show up on your mobile screen, use the cross-platform input. In other words, it will handle input from using a desktop game. And then if you want to switch over to mobile and do a mobile build, it will make little joysticks show up as well. And they give you all this as demos. These are called the standard assets. So let's look at a demo first of the standard assets, because the standard assets really are an example of prefabs and Unity package. So let's go over to this one here. I've essentially opened up the project that Unity gives you, standard assets example project. Now you can either open up their demo project, or you can create a new project and just import them as you see fit. And so when we did a new project dialog, all of these little options here that I really touched upon briefly, all these asset packages, think of them as NuGet packages for your game, or as I mentioned, that kind of a zip file that contains a bunch of content. You can select them when you create your project, or you can always select them later on. And you do that through the Assets Import Package. And this looks on your system and says, oh, okay, Unity has provided you some out of the box here. Some functionality to have a character running around on the screen. There's your cross-platform input. If you want to do some trees, like this environment that we're looking at right here, it's because I brought in some trees and grass and some images, textures. texture is a very common term you hear in game development. A texture is just an image. So this little image that got plastered all over this terrain here is just a texture. Now, using the standard assets, you can pretty quickly create a world like this. But this is essentially the standard assets demo project they give you. And early on, I mentioned, hey, we want to find the scenes in our project. So let's filter by scene and see what Unity gives us. We have an aircraft jet scene, a 2-axis aircraft jet. Let's run that demo. There we go. I'll use my keyboard here. We can see particle effect in the background here. And I have to zoom in all over the place here. There's one you can do for a car, a roller ball, other particles that you can look at. So these are essentially standard assets. These are demos that they give you. And you can see whenever Unity's standard assets get imported into your project, they're pretty consistent. They go under the standard assets folder. So let me just show you something real quick you can do. I did this in early MVA that we did on gaming engines for Windows 8 Jumpstart, where I literally created a new scene. I created a terrain. I assigned an image to a terrain. Now, this isn't to really walk you through this process. I just want to show you kind of the power of what you can do quickly with some of the standard assets here. Now I have a terrain that has all of this dirt on there. If I wanted to, I could just sculpt it out real quick. Some of the really the only built-in 3D functionality inside of Unity. I could take the water that Unity gives us underneath the environment. It's a prefab. Now, if I notice water.prefab, a prefab gives me nice and easy drag and drop functionality. I can literally just drag and drop water up there, make it nice and big by scaling it out in the X and the Z, because water is only a visual effect, doesn't actually have depth. So we're just scaling it out in the X and the Z, not the Y. Perfect. There, we have a nice little world. If I want something that I can explore, let me go back to the other scene I had open here, one that I just built out a tiny bit more. If I want to run around this world, well, let me click play right now. I don't have any way to explore this world. And that's a very common use case, right? We want to be able to have somebody that I can run around and some way to interact with this world. Using the standard assets, Unity gives us under characters, we have a third person, which is a little character running around on the screen, or a first person, prefabs. Prefabs, reusable bits you can drag and drop and reuse. If I drop this guy down here, move it up just a tiny bit, and click play, even before I click play, notice a prefab, if I click on it here, not in my project, I'm looking at my prefab right now. My prefab, it's a game object. It has some components on there. It has code that Unity has already written that has a walk speed, it has a run speed, it has a jump speed, has mouse look, X and Y sensitivity, all different ways I can tweak how I can interact with my mouse and keyboard. Do I have head bob? Do I have jump bob? So all really advanced properties. All these things we would want to create on a first-person controller, they've already written the code, the object for us to do that. Hence the advantage of a prefab. It's a pre-packaged object that we can just drag and drop into our scene. And what is a first-person controller? It's essentially a camera. If we look at this, it's a camera that has code that makes it just bob along our scene. In other words, it just takes it and goes, imagine that my hand here is a camera. If we have code that takes the camera and just goes like that, that's a first-person view. You know, you see a lot of games, first-person shooters. It's a camera with a little gun right here. And then it's just going like that as you're walking along. It's code that takes your game object, moves it up along a path. That's all it is. So let's click on play here. Since it's already given me a camera as part of this, I'm going to delete the default camera I have here. Click on play. And there we go. Now I have a way that I can easily come in here and explore my world. I can jump, I have some physics associated with it. First-person code already written for us. And that's available in the standard assets package. Again, they're standard assets. They're things, they're common problems that they have solved for you and have given you the code and abilities to do that. And you can import that into any project. So for example, if I had another project and I wanted to import a first-person character controller, I would import package, characters. That's decompressing that Unity package. Remember I said think of it as like a zip file of Unity content. It's building a list of what's in there, and it shows you everything in that package and where it's going to bring it into your project. There's everything, all these C# files, all this code, all these images. It will bring it into the project for you, and you can just use that functionality. You just say import, and it brings it in for you. That's the advantages of using these Unity packages. Now, that's it for a Unity package. Let's talk about, next, creating prefabs and creating our Unity packages. Now, why would we want to create a prefab? Let's go back to Adam here. Let's create another one. Let's create, inside this scene, I'm going to create a cube. And this cube is going to be, let's say this is going to be a border. And I'm going to scale this out, maybe on this side. Now, this might not be exact here, but you'll see the kind of the point here. We have one cube there. Let's go ahead and create another one and just rotate it by, say, 90 degrees. And maybe this will be a barrier that we want to reuse inside of our scene. So this is a reusable barrier. Let's create a game object, and I'll call this barrier. Now, granted, I haven't colored it. I haven't made it look like anything yet. We'll call it side 1, and we'll call this one side 2. I will click on both those game objects. Oops. Click on both of those and just drag it on the barrier. So that's a process called parenting. I have this container parent game object called barrier. It has 2 child game objects. If I move the parent game object, both of them go with me. Now I have a problem. I cannot reuse my awesome barrier throughout my different scenes right now. So what I like to do is I just create a folder called prefabs. Prefabs. And in that folder, I can just take my barrier and drag and drop it. Now notice, my barrier, the color here is white. In the hierarchy, it's white. As soon as I drag and drop it, notice barrier.prefab gets created, and this is now blue. And when I click on it, I now have these other options here. The first option is select, and that shows me where in my project that barrier prefab is. I can also right-click on it and say select prefab. That just shows me where that root object is. Now, the advantage of this is I can drag and drop these across my various scenes now. I have this reusable object. Maybe I need another barrier here. Maybe I'm building out a level and I need a barrier maybe over here for some reason. As I'm making this barrier, I suddenly realize, whoa, this is all wrong. One side of my barrier needs to be shorter. Well, I can come into my barrier and I can change one of them. I can change maybe the length of this one. And notice, as I change my prefab, they all update at the same time. So that's an advantage of using prefabs. I can update this root object and they all update. So if I have a zombie, I can drag and drop a bunch of zombies, and if I make changes to one, it affects them all, which is good. I can also customize just one. So for example, maybe on this particular single prefab here, I want to change this guy's scale. Oops. Let's change not the overall barrier, but just this side. Let's scale this to be a little bit shorter. Push that back a little bit, and maybe make this barrier like that. Maybe it's like more of a T barrier. Now notice that barrier is now different than the others. So if I update side 2, notice they all change except that one because I've overridden that property. So I can accept that behavior, or maybe I want to change all of these to a T barrier. What I can do is I can tell this prefab to update this, in other words, this instance, to push its changes down to this guy right here, which will in turn update all of them. And the way you do that is you simply click Apply over here. And once you click Apply, it will take your customizations and write them to this root prefab object and then update all the rest of them since they all stem from this one object. So if I click Apply, there we go. Now, the revert button is, as you might expect, if I make changes to this prefab and I really mess it up, and I say, uh-oh, I just messed this prefab up, I want to revert back to its original state. That's what revert is for. So that's a prefab. Very, very common object. And if we looked at what we did with the environment stuff here, it's very common to look for a folder called prefab. So when I looked under water, there's a folder called prefab. When you download stuff from the Unity Asset Store, and you simply do that by going to Window Asset Store, or you can use the web browser. You can download stuff from the web browser, and it would actually trigger it off in Unity's interface. Whenever you download stuff from the Unity Asset Store here, it's very common that when you bring it into your project, you will see a prefabs folder. And using those prefabs, you just drag and drop them. That's the great thing about prefabs. You just drag and drop them into your scene. Now, what about when I take this barrier and I really like it? I want to export this out to be able to use it in different projects. Or maybe myself, Adam, I want to use this in a different project. So let's see if I can't take Adam. Let's right-click and go ahead and find my prefab here. Right here. So let me right-click and export package. So again, all I did was I right-clicked on my object in here. It could be a prefab, it could be anything in here. It could be a folder. I can right-click on a folder and say export package. But in this case, I'm going to right-click on Adam and say export package. And I'm going to choose all the defaults there. Sometimes it picks up a couple more things than are necessary. In this case, it looks pretty good. Export. Let's go to my typical dumping ground here. We'll choose the desktop, and we'll call this Adam. It's creating my Unity package for me, adam.unitypackage. Now, there we go, adam.unitypackage. So when I go over to this game, this experience, I can either just double click on it on my desktop, or I can say assets, import package, custom package. Either one works. Again, I can just double click on it. Because I have 3 different instances of Unity open now, I'm going to explicitly use this instance and browse to it. And say adam.unitypackage. And it's going to tell me what's inside of this package. Import. Almost done. Once this is done, I'm going to be able to, because it's this reusable object, I can drag and drop it. Now, you may have noticed that that Adam file is actually an FBX. Recall that I said this is a very common format you'll get from a 3D artist. They will give you an FBX file. FBX files are treated like prefabs when you use them in your projects. So they can be either a .prefab or a .fbx file. So this import should be done momentarily. As soon as this import is done, I can drag and drop and bring this guy into Unity. And this is nice, reusable bits of information. And this is taking a little bit to process my texture, so we'll give this guy 1 second here. While it does that, let's just reinforce these concepts here. Assets import package shows you all the Unity packages. You can actually find Unity packages on your system. If I recall, let's see if I can recall this off the top of my head. Users, Adam, oops, app data, roaming, Unity, asset store. There we go. So here we can, this is the local asset store cache. If I actually go into here, look at that. There's a birdflock.unity package. If I look at some other folder here, there's another Unity package. All the stuff that you bring down to your system from Unity's asset store, they're just .unity package files. It looks like my import finished over here. And it's doing its final processing on there. Alrighty. There we go. There's the folder Atom. And let's find my, there we go. There's my FBX file. Let's drag Atom into the scene. Double click on it to bring it in the view. There we go. I have now made it into this virtual world of mine. And it brought me in with the defaults of beard and funny hair as well. So that's the advantage of being able to use a Unity package. You can reuse this across all of your different projects. I hope that gives you a good overview of using prefabs and Unity packages. They're an integral part to using Unity. When you grab content from other people and use it, chances are it's coming to you as a Unity package. When you open it up inside of Unity, there's a prefab that you drag and drop. Very, very common operations inside of Unity. Hope this helps. We'll see you next section.